Well, I'd like to welcome you all here today, and I'm Representative Joyce McDonald, and I'm the newest member of Republican leadership, and drew the short straw, I think, today. So I'm here, and I would like to introduce Representative David Taylor, and as you know, David was the one that was so instrumental for our caucus in bringing a solution for the Hearst bill, the Hearst fix. And we're looking forward to your questions.
Senator Mark Schessler, the Republican leader. With me today is our caucus chair, Randy Becker, and our state government ranking member, Mark Malosha. Happy to be here with you and ready to field your questions.
The Senate will be addressed for taking up a resolution that was passed by the House last week related to sexual harassment and creating a task force to address the issue. And then there are a series of bills being heard in Senate Labor and Commerce tomorrow, sponsored by Senator Kaiser. Just wanted to talk with members of both caucuses on what your thoughts are on that effort.
We take that issue very seriously, and we are wholeheartedly support the task force and are behind any efforts to make sure that every employee here at the legislature in particular feels safe, secure, and appreciated.
And in the Senate, when we started hearing about the accusations, we immediately convened an F&O meeting and talked about the task force and actually provided training this year already for all of our members and our staff. We too take this very seriously. We had talked about a four-corner leadership on this task force, and we hadn't heard anything from the House side, sent a letter and waited for that response, and I'm glad to see that it's happening. It's something we take really seriously.
The bills that are being considered tomorrow are workplaces in general, not focused just on the Capitol. It's non-disclosure agreements that would prohibit allowing a non-disclosure agreement to keep somebody from speaking out about sexual harassment or assault. How does leadership feel about those bills? Senator Schessler?
You know, I haven't seen the non-disclosure bill yet, to be honest with you, Rachel. Certainly those settlements shouldn't be, but other details in the bill I'm not aware of yet.
And we haven't discussed those issues either. Look forward to making sure that all of our members can engage in committee, and when they do that, then we will have those issues come to the House caucus and then the floor, I'm assuming.
I know there's been some concern from getting input from rank and file staff members around the legislature. I know that there's a little bit of worry, I think, about staff members lobbying for changes in the legislature when it comes to sexual harassment, because I think there's some restrictions around that. But can you all talk about how, if you're trying to address that, or how you plan on getting input from not just lobbyists and lawmakers, but also staff members?
So I think, first of all, we have a really good policy in place already, and that was disclosed at our training. And staff members have the ability to bring things forward, and I've not heard that they are lobbying for anything at this point in time. We have not heard that, but I'll go back and check on it, because if they are lobbying to have their voices heard in a different way, then we need to listen to them.
And there is a process and a path to ensure that all staff members have their issues heard. And while the Senate had training for its members at the beginning of session, the House Republicans had training at our retreat, which I believe was November or December. And at that time, the chief clerk's office came in and laid out the pathway that they would be presenting to staff members to ensure that they had access and could access the process to redress any of their concerns.
Sure, and I guess I just meant partially more broadly too, just input on any reforms that the legislature may enact, like how you get staff input.
The task force will be doing that.
Will specifically get staff input.
Mm-hmm. It's important. This is an important issue.
It is.
But what's really important is that, when we're looking at this, sexual harassment can go both ways, women to men and men to women. And so we've asked that there be included on the lobbying side of that portion of it, at least, some of the men to be representative of the issues they've faced, because since this all came up, we've heard from men as well as women.
Can you talk about bills that you guys are interested in seeing come to the floor, and if not this week, in the coming weeks?
You know, I haven't, it was fairly non-controversial package of polls, so haven't really looked that closely at what's coming out of committees. I can say that we'd have more good bipartisan bills if we had a few less work sessions or hearings on bills that have really no hope even in the current makeup of the legislature.
Such as?
Well, I think in the healthcare committee, Senator Becker has pointed out that there's been an incredible amount of time on work sessions or bills that don't have a very likely fate. In the meantime, she's seen a number of good bipartisan things that would otherwise cruise out. And it's such a busy committee, Rachel. It is in the top 3 every year for the number of bills, and they're not without controversy. So if you burn up a lot of time on work sessions, the good bills really don't have a lot of time.
But what are your examples of the waste of time?
So I'd love to talk to you about, because I talked to the governor about this, governor's staff and then the governor this morning about it, but my telemedicine bill, we know that bill is not a perfect bill, but we're getting input from everyone. And, you know, when we talk about health care in the state, and people out in the rural areas are not getting insurance and they're not getting health care, access to health care, well, this is a methodology to create a pilot program that would do some things with payments, looking at 4 different areas, mental health being one of them, looking at the opioid addiction problem, and we're wording those things so we can incorporate that. We're looking at stroke, and we're looking at diabetes treatment because diabetes is one of our higher costs. This is something that I think is critical for the state of Washington, and I know telemedicine has been my bailiwick for a few years, but that's why. Because there are programs out in other states, and we have the ability to teach some of our primary care, our physician assistants, et cetera, how to do some of the chronic treatment like they're doing in New Mexico for diabetes, where this physician assistant was not able to treat one chronic diabetic patient, but now she's seeing 75. And so that's what we're trying to do. That's what we feel is so important. When I was chair of healthcare, we had 160 bills come through that committee one year. And in a normal kind of, you know, time, we had almost that many. So you have to really focus on where, from my perspective, what you're going to do the most good for the most people. And that's been, in my perspective, telemedicine.
What did Senator Cleveland say about your telemedicine?
She signed on to my telemedicine bill, and we heard it today. It was at the last after the work session. We got to spend about 12 to 15 minutes on it, and we are going to have a stakeholders meeting to clarify on some of the language, clean up the things that we need to do. And I'm very hopeful that bill will pass. I talked to Representative Cody about it last night. She's interested. And this is something that is a big deal for the people of the state of Washington.
So in other words, it is moving now.
It is moving, I hope, but yes, I think so.
Some issues that we still have in the House Republicans is it relates to the ST3 tax and the increasing MVET bill that struggling families are having to deal with. And you know that it's really a problem for families when we have bills being introduced to actually allow for payment plans. I think that's unconscionable. People should not need a payment plan to pay their car tabs. So those issues are very important for our caucus.
The House Republican Caucus, I think it's important to note that the first 2 weeks of session we were focused pretty squarely on a couple of particular issues, Hearst and capital budget. In the committees that I serve on, we're just now seeing a lot of those bills begin to move through the process in the executive session. But from a caucus standpoint, I think we're still focused squarely on affordable housing, bills put forward by Representatives Barkas and Maycumber. Of course, the opioid bills are still moving, and we certainly are looking at Rep. Hayes' pilot program as an opportunity to address some of those. And of course, the forest health and forest fire protection bills are still firmly and squarely within our priorities. So those are continuing to move. We've got a couple of weeks left to get those through policy committees and then ultimately, hopefully, into those fiscal committees.
If you had a chance to look at the governor, he put together kind of an opioid roundtable, I believe, last week and has his own proposals both in his budget since then to address the opioid crisis. Have you looked at that? Is there any area of agreements with you and the governor on that?
I haven't looked at that. I've been focused on other things. Those we have caucus members that are specific to those particular issues. I'm not involved in those discussions.
I've looked at the governor's one bill, and I think it falls way short. In fact, I just dropped a bill having to do with setting up a central authority, sort of drug czar for heroin, which is needed. And of course, I had those bills from last year having to do with more metrics and oversight, finding out which treatment works or not. But what's most disappointing, and I killed the effort last year, is changing drug policy, which you had for 75 years, moving from an abstinence base, you'll go through detox and get off the drug, to a new system where it's all about harm reduction and morbidity, nothing about getting off the drug. That's the model Amsterdam and Portugal and even Canada is moving to, which is basically decriminalized or you stay on those drugs for the rest of your life. I think it's a scary change in direction for an entire drug treatment program. It's radical, and there's no talk about that, about how we're changing drug policy and what's the implications of both costs and success. So focus on that issue. And I think moving toward the Canada or Portugal model, we need a bigger discussion before we make that radical change in drug policy.
And that's where I think that it's really interesting, because last year, if the goal isn't abstinence from drug use, then it's just putting them on a medication and saying you're okay. The thing that I feel very strongly is this is where telemedicine can tie in and give these patients, Dr. Unitzer at the University of Washington and I have had discussions, and we do a good job of making good patients, but what our focus needs to be is making patients well. And if we don't focus on that and we don't try to help these people overcome that, then we're just continuing to add to even into the medication cost, et cetera. So this is for the patient's outcome, not for government to say it's okay.
The car tab just for a moment, that's a John Holden, maybe others. Are the Republicans, one of the Democrats' concern is how you keep Sound Transit whole to some degree, the $780 million that they say they'll use over the course of time to change. Do Republicans have any interest in solving that problem? And if so, how would you do it?
We're surely interested in talking with them about that, but we're more interested in keeping families whole, because families are struggling. And I know that representatives in the ST3 area have been inundated with people outraged as to how they did not know that how serious and how large this would be. And that was, they haven't yet paid their property taxes, and there are increases in that too. And I imagine we will get more as time goes on.
But are there ideas that are bubbling around in your caucus of why don't we do this so they'll stop complaining about the lost revenue, we can focus on those families?
We have some, Representative Mark Harmsworth is our lead on that. And I know that he's been in discussions. He has his own bills. He has other ideas and options. And so we would love to work with the Democrat caucus and, of course, the Senate to provide a long-lasting solution. Still that will move forward with Sound Transit's goals, but at the same time understand that there's only a certain amount of tax that you can get out of people. And people on fixed incomes are paying too much just for their car tabs. So I'm hoping that this is something. I know that Representative Pelliciotti has a bill, but it hasn't yet come to the floor, so we haven't had an opportunity to have much input on that right now.
And if in our caucus, Senator O'Bannon, to me, the best thing to improve Sound Transit is Senator O'Bannon's bill about elected board. And the second best thing was implement quality for spending that $54 billion. But there really needs to be accountability that's directed toward the people and toward their management processes. So if you really want to save money and get better oversight of the agency, you have to break the current system, which is basically appointed and run by the King County Executive.
Well, I have a Hurstville question, two questions. First, last week the governor signed the bill in his office, so there was not an opportunity for a photo op after all the interviews.
After all that work.
I was wondering about the reaction to that. And then second, just about every bill that gets passed that's that complicated around here generally needs to have tweaks. sometimes the very next session. Well, you're in the next session. So are there any tweaks, changes, revisions, technical corrections that have already shown up that you realize you need to go back and deal with this session?
Not specifically. I guess let's start with the bill signing. I'll speak for myself, and I think I can speak for Vincent Buys, Representative Buys. We're not here for photo ops. We're here to do the people's work. So I'm just happy to have the governor's signature on that bill. So far, nobody has identified specific tweaks. We know there are a couple of areas that, due to the negotiations, we weren't able to address. The Skagit Basin, YRIS 3 and 4, and whether we would be able to do anything in the Yakima Basin, YRIS 37, 38, and 39. There's discussions that are continuing to happen, but as I'm sure you can imagine, everybody's a little gun shy right now about talking water, but we are talking, and I think it's important that to note that as building on the success that we finally received in Hearst, we are hoping that we can continue those discussions into broader areas.
I would suggest from the Senate standpoint, you go back and listen to Senator Bailey's remarks that night on the floor of the Senate. She's been getting promises of next year we'll do it for 4 or 5 years. It's always next year. People that didn't even show up to take the vote, proposals to haul water to every house, but yet these are hundreds of families, farms that we want to sustain that really needs a fix. And just go back and listen to her remarks, and you'll understand why this is the one area that I know Rep. Taylor is extremely committed to working on with everybody.
Last week when the bill passed, Senator Warnick, we were talking to her on the floor, and she said, she saw tying Hearst to the capital budget as ultimately a success, and that it forced Democrats to the table. And I just, spinning this forward, I asked the same thing of Democrats earlier, but can you just talk broadly about, whether, this was one specific thing, but can we expect filling up the capital budget for bills to be, something that happens again in the future?
Well, first of all, this wasn't the first time that there had been something. We had a budget agreement with all 4 corners 3 years ago. And we came out on the floor, and without even telling Jim Hargrove, the Ways and Means Ranking Minority Member, the budget was held hostage for a choice of bad policy bills we didn't like. So we were not the first to do it. And every member of our caucus knew what we were doing. We didn't blindside a chairman like happened 3 years ago. I don't believe for 1 minute that there would have been a Hearst bill had this not happened. We went for 13 months without a real solution from the executive branch. The House didn't put anything on the floor for 6 months. Nor did they have a proposal when they got here. So what other tool was there to help all 39 counties in the state of Washington get water?
I would add, number one, I concur with Senator Schessler's remarks that had the Senate not shown the leadership to force the issue, we would not have addressed Hearst. I mean, I think that the history of this legislative body demonstrates that. But what doesn't ever get discussed is there was roughly $180 million in that capital budget for urban water infrastructure. And what we have consistently heard from ecology is exempt wells result in less than 1% annual consumptive use. And yet, the very thought of tying a capital budget that has $180 million of urban water infrastructure is inappropriate. It floors me. They are certainly connected, and it happened to be, in this case, the tool necessary to ultimately get the job done. Whether we'll see it in the future, that's a leadership call. And not only the Senate Republican leadership, but my leadership. And I would say that's probably going to be issue-based. Is there a direct tie? And in this case, given the investment that was being made to urban water infrastructure, I believe there is a significant tie there.
So if there wasn't a direct tie in your mind, would it be less appropriate to tie?
That's a leadership call.
Where does the Senate caucus stand on efforts by Senate Democrats and the Ways and Means Committee to introduce or to push more legislative evaluation
You know, they've got 25 votes. They can repeal anyone they want. We've had study after study. We've put performance matrix. You got 25 vote.
And we've done some research in the House on that. And the majority of those tax exemption bills come through the Democrat caucus.
And we also have the JLARC review study, which I was on up until this last year, and we review everything about those exemptions and are they actually doing the job. Sometimes they recommend we keep them. Sometimes they recommend they're not doing the job and to get rid of them.
There's a Senate version of the bill. I signed on to it. I'm for anything that brings better accountability. There's tweaks I do, more with metrics, but again, ultimately at the end of the day, the issue for that issue of taxes is not about, you know, the evaluation is just, do we have the political will to get the 25 votes or the majority of votes in both chambers? That's always been the issue with taxes.
And I'd like to keep businesses in Washington. You know, we're losing some of our small businesses, and we're losing some business looking outside of Washington State. And so I think there's a balance here that we have to really pay attention to, because without business, we're just people in this state, and we won't have a methodology to pay for what we're looking to do in our lives.
And by the way, I also think there should be something similar to that on programs. We don't evaluate programs whether they're working or not, especially, for example, homelessness. The big disaster we have with homelessness programs is hurting everybody across the state, and there's not enough accountability on that, evaluating whether we're spending the money correctly or not.
And since I'm new to leadership and I'm looking out at you all, and I don't know some of you, and I would be interested if you would be willing to just introduce yourselves really quickly so I know who you are. But can we start here?
I'm Jerry Cornfield from the Daily Herald.
Thank you, Jerry. I know I've met you before lots of times. I just want to be I have lots of younger people here.
Rachel for Associated Press.
Hi, Rachel.
Walker Ornstein, Company Distribution.
And I've talked to you on the phone, Walker, and I've never met you in person. Sorry about that. Yes.
He looks younger, doesn't he?
I just thought he was wise.
Taylor McAvoy with the WNPA.
Josh Belding, also for the WPA.
Okay. Yes, sir.
This was all Seattle Times.
Okay.
I Pacheco with Seattle Times as well.
Great.
Rachel Sun with the Spokesman Review.
Great. Anybody else? No? Thank you so much for that. And John, do we have a time limit here? I didn't
If you have
ask.
more questions, we have 5 minutes.
All right.
There's
Oh.
a bill being sponsored by Representative Taylor that would end the practice of putting foster children in offices or hotels for the night. I was just wondering what the Republican caucus's support for.
Are you sure you have my name on that bill correctly?
I believe it is.
That's a bill I would have sponsored. I probably didn't, but I'm a former foster parent, and I last session was on the Early Learning and Human Services Committee, and it's an issue we did have reports on. We were very concerned about it. It's inappropriate, it's traumatic for young people, and so I think Representative Kagi has been working on this issue, and I think she will have a lot of support in the Republican caucus on that. A lot, some support. I don't know if it's that one specifically. It depends on whether or not it has to go to appropriations and how much it will actually cost. But I know the practice is something that we want to see ended.
Yeah, and that practice, I was wondering about bills that would that would limit that or reduce that by, giving funding to like BRS, behavioral rehabilitation services, or incentives for social workers to, stay in their jobs by paying for their school and stuff like that.
Yeah, I look forward to
Very,
seeing the
very good
bills.
question. There's a number of bills that I've been involved with in the Senate on that. I think the entire foster care system has been an ongoing disaster for 2 decades. And one of the reasons why I oppose to set up the separate committee rather than working on the issues you mentioned. For example, there's a bill which the governor happens to oppose having to do with FINS by Senator Darneal, which would completely undercut BECA and the court system. But those are the issues you talk about. We have to fix foster care, and we're not paying anywhere near the attention about fixing, like I said, the 2-decade disaster that's going on with foster care.
Jerry?
Could you share the reaction within the caucus to the decision that your records are now public under the court order, and being the fiscal conservatives that you are, the money, the tab to the taxpayers is growing every day, that you continue to pursue the suit? Is there any talk in the caucus of finding a solution that would end the spending?
I'm not going to comment on pending litigation, Jerry.
you guys comment on pending litigation frequently.
Excuse
especially
me,
Prairie and-
Walker. The lawsuit specifically named me in pending litigation as well as the Senate, so I won't be commenting.
And I've introduced the bills, trying to get the discussion, talking along with Representative Graves and Representative Pollitt.
But how confident are you that that bill would get a hearing given the reticence by leadership to discuss?
Oh, Sam Hunt said he's going to hold a hearing yesterday. So that'll start the discussions independent of what's going on in the courts. I'm doing my own independent thing, trying to get, I'd like to hear from the public. I threw my gold standard out there about what I want to see for public records and all the input and public comment. So if you have any ideas about suggestions about to do, I'm welcome to hear them.
My concern is that we have constituents that contact us that are victims of domestic violence. They are people with mental illness and other things, and I'm very concerned about ensuring that their privacy and security is protected. When I was on the Pierce County Council, which we fully complied with the Public Records Act, I had someone who stalked me and got every piece of information out of my office and my emails, and that in itself wasn't troubling because I didn't say anything that was not okay and open to the public. But what did concern me was that people who had contacted me about maybe their son or daughter that was in the Pierce County Jail and their mental health issues or domestic violence issues and other things like that, those people had an expectation. It was not a real expectation, but those constituents had an expectation that they could leave that concern with me and I would follow up on it and everybody else wouldn't know. So that, to me, that's the balance that we're going to have to walk through, but I agree, it's pending litigation, so.
Senator, do you find a great deal of difference in what you did in local law enforcement, local government, where those records were available, and then what you're doing in state government? And is there a way to describe for the public why records in one venue of legislating should be treated differently than in
I like to see some of the efforts at the state level is simply because misery loves company. It was a very, very difficult thing to deal with at the local government level. It was very costly. We had 2 staff members at Pierce County that worked on it almost full time. I can't imagine what it would be like here at the state. So I think if there's something that could be dealt with properly, or maybe a balance or a compromise, that's something that leadership will deal with. Or the 4 corners, not me. Thank you.